Welcome to the ID lesson for quiz number 7. We're starting right off with our first bird, the brown thrasher. And first thing you might notice when you look at the brown thrasher is this very distinct yellow eye. It has a fairly large beak as well. This is a fairly good sized bird. It has a very long tail. That's one of the ways you can quickly distinguish it. So if you look at this picture here, the shape is, you can see the fairly long beak and the fairly long tail. I want to say, think blue jay size on this might be a good comparison. They're often quite visible because they will sing sitting up at the top of a tree somewhere. Again, not really a interior forest species. This is more of a shrubby area, scrubby area bird, or an open area as long as there are some hiding places around like shrubs and things, because they often feed on the ground, so they don't want to be in a complete forest. They want to be someplace where they can get into the open areas. Okay, so how do you know a brown thrasher when you see it? As I said, it has a large, well, that's not going to help me. Let's find the pictures. Here we go. Long tail. It is a very brown bird. Come on, there we go. A very brown bird with dark spots. Now, we are going to learn a wood thrush at some point. And those of you who looked at Zach's family presentation, he talked about the wood thrush, and there are some similarities. The wood thrush is very spotted on its breast as well. But note the white or the yellow eye. Note the long tail. And the wing bars. Remember, wing bars are these stripes that occur across the wing when the tips of the coverts are colored with white. So you get these white wing bars, yellow eye, fairly good sized beak, long tail. Okay, this is the brown thrasher. Now you need to know this by sound as well. And the brown thrasher is one of our mimics. You remember when we talked about the catbird? I said the catbird was one of the mimics, and the catbird varies its sound over and like it doesn't repeat the phrase. It just keeps all these different phrases, new phrase, new phrase, new phrase. Just very kind of doing new things all the time. The brown thrasher, you can remember because it repeats the phrase twice, and then it'll move on to a new phrase, so a new kind of sound. Let's listen to it here. Okay, so every once in a while you'd hear something that maybe didn't sound like it was repeated, but then you did hear some that were very clearly repeated twice. When you hear that, it's brown thrasher, okay? So that's the brown thrasher. Let's move on to the next bird. And we're going to go with cedar waxwing. This is a really gorgeous bird. It's got these subtle colors, but it's so sleek. The way its feathers, some birds are much rougher. Their feathers are rougher. If you remember feather structures and the barbs, the interlocking barbs, cedar waxwings are one of the birds that the barbs really are really tight, and so the feathers just create this smooth shine over it. Has this wonderful black mask. This is one of our fruit-eating birds, so we do see them a lot in fruit trees. Size-wise, think about the size of what would be a good comparison? Oh, well, a gray catbird would be a good comparison, although that's not a bird many of you know. A little larger than a tufted titmouse, smaller than a cardinal. Like a cardinal, there is a little bit of a crest. See the little crest on the top here? Let's look at this picture here. There's a little crest, but it doesn't stick straight up like the cardinal does. They're sort of brownish, bay-colored on the back. They have yellow underneath. And then they have, you can't see it very well here, but there's this wonderful bright yellow strip on the tail. Then often they also have these little red pinprick dots on the edge of their wings. Now this one doesn't have any. Let me see if there's a picture that does. Here you go, this one. Look at this. Look at these little tiny red things that stick out, end of the feathers that stick out. You can actually determine how old a bird is by the number of these little red things that stick out on their wings, which is pretty cool. So this is a cedar waxwing. I don't think you'll have trouble confusing it with other birds. There aren't too many that look like it. You do not need to know the sound, but I'm going to play it for you. It's a very high-pitched sound, and it may sound familiar because these are birds that will hang out around people in, say, a tree that still has fruits on it through the winter. So here's the call. So they are one of our really high-pitched birds. They have a slightly different sound. It's also pretty high-pitched. Here it is. So that's considered the trill sound. If any of you listen to the sound on the dark-eyed junco, there's a lot of similarities between the cedar waxwing sound and the dark-eyed junco sound. Okay, next bird is one of our smallest birds, or one of the smallest around here. Bigger than a hummingbird, but smaller than a chickadee, and that is the blue-gray gnatcatcher. Love this bird. It's that slate blue-gray, and so it's not quite gray. It's not bright blue. It's somewhere in between, and it has this wonderful white eye ring. Remember the ring around the eye? It also has a black eyebrow. Okay, so it's a small bird. Remember, we're talking smaller than a chickadee, quite little, smaller than a warbler even. And they flit about in the trees. This is a fun one because this is one that you're going to know about that people who just watch bird feeders aren't going to know about. And yet they're fairly common. They have a white outer tail feather. I think we had another bird recently that had the white outer tail feather. How do I get out of here? Let's see. There we go. Can't see. Here you go. You can see the white outer tail feathers here. So notice a much kind of a stubby little body. It has a long tail. The tail is almost the length of its body, even though it's a small bird. A very small little pointed beak, much like a warbler beak. And you do need to know this one by sound as well. And the sound on this one, the person who taught me birds said that they always thought that this bird sounded a little bit like it had asthma. It's a very wheezy sound. See what you think. So the call is not very musical, and it has that kind of rough, like he has a scratchy throat kind of thing. Not much in the change of pitch, so just kind of a wheeze little sound, and that is the blue-gray gnatcatcher. I remember it's a small bird because I remember it's too small to eat flies. It has to eat gnats. Okay, next bird, going to a different kind of bird, and this is one of our ducks called the northern shoveler. And I mentioned this earlier in the lecture about bird bills because the northern shoveler has this big beak that it uses to dig down into the mud. It is one of what we call the dabbling ducks, which means it does not dive under the water. It tips itself upside down and reaches down with its neck in the shallows to get down into the mud and eat things out of the water. Now here you can see the beak, and remember how it has a beak like a strainer, and when it brings its bill up, the water will drain out of its beak before it swallows through this kind of straining mechanism it has here. So if you wanted to see a bird that it might look similar to, you might think mallard, right? It's got a green head, but in other ways, it's different than the mallard. The beak is certainly distinctive. When you see that from a distance, it's pretty easy to know shoveler. It also has this chestnut side and white here. Okay, so I think we can maybe see a quick comparison down here. Yeah. Oh, they don't even give us a mallard as a similar species. Guess I don't think it's very similar. Okay, and you do not need to know the shoveler by sound, and I'm not even going to play it for you. All right. The next bird is also a common bird that many people do not pay any attention to. And it's a fun bird because you can see it in the middle of towns. It is one of the times I see it the most is circling around lights in a parking lot because they are insect eaters. They are the common nighthawks. So nighthawks, you can't quite tell how odd looking they are, but when they're sitting still, they have kind of a weird shape. They have a stubby, they almost have no neck. They often sit with their eyes closed. We've talked about that before, how many birds will close their eyes for camouflage so that you don't get the reflection off of their eyes. And these birds are incredibly camouflaged, partly because they are crepuscular, which means they are hunting in the dusk and the dawn, and they need to be sleeping during the day. And if you're going to sleep during the bright daylight, you're going to be vulnerable to predators, so you want to be camouflaged, right? So here's a nighthawk sitting. Notice it kind of has a hawk look, but it's very different, right? It does have those whiskers that we saw with the flycatchers, which makes sense because these are birds that eat insects, and they're going to be sort of guiding the insects into their beak with those whiskers. They have a large gaping mouth when they open it. You can't really tell from this picture. They do have these white spots on their wings, which can make them fairly easy to see. So when they're flying, look how much like, say, a falcon this looks. Has a tail that's spread out. You can see this white wing band, and then you see this wing band here on the edges of their wings. Very distinctive, and then a stubby little head lets you know that it's not a falcon you're looking at. It is, in fact, a nighthawk. And you do need to know the call on this. I wanted you to know the call because this is how you spot these things when you're, getting out of your car in the parking lot in the evening, and suddenly you hear the sound. Look up, and you can spot a common nighthawk. So their sound is like a meet, meet. Here it is. Kind of crazy. So be listening for that in the spring. So this is migratory, so it's not going to be here quite yet. It's actually one of the later migrants to come back. But once spring gets underway for real, not just this fake spring we're having now, listen for that peent. It's similar to another bird that I'm not sure is on our list or not, which is the woodcock, and we'll talk about that later. But that is the common nighthawk. Okay, here we go. The next one is the eastern wood pewee. So this bird is one of our flycatchers. And the other flycatcher we've had so far has been the eastern phoebe. And if you remember what the phoebe looks like, this looks a lot like it. It also looks a lot like all of the other flycatchers we have. There are lots of them. There's the olive-sided flycatcher and the alder flycatcher and the Acadian flycatcher, and they all look a lot like this. So I'm not going to ask you to be able to identify this one by sight. This is the one bird where I'm asking you to identify it by sound alone, because the sound is very distinctive. But before we do that, let's talk about, remember, flycatchers have those wide beaks with the whiskers. Okay, so it has all of those features. See if there's a good picture here. Flycatchers, eastern wood peewees, are actually quite agile, and they have really longer wings than the other flycatchers. And there's something called a primary projection, which is their outer primary feathers stick out further out the wing than the secondaries do. So that's just a little point to talk about bird anatomy. But what I want you to know is the song. So they say their name. They say peewee, peewee, peew, peewee. And they'll just do this over and over and over again. And these are forest-dwelling birds. So when you're walking through the middle of the forest, you might hear this bird. Again, they are migratory. They're not going to be here right now, but they will be later on. Here it is. So peewee, peewee, peew, peewee, and there might be any combination of those two sorts of sounds, but they will say their name over and over again. That is the eastern wood peewee. You only have to know it by sound. Okay, the next bird is the house finch. The house finch is easy to confuse with another bird called the purple finch. Whoa. But I'm not going to ask you to learn the purple finch. The house finch is one of our reddish birds. We don't have too many reddish birds around here. We, of course, have the cardinal, which is stunningly red. The purple finch is a slightly more purpley red on it. And the house finch, notice the house finch, the red is concentrated near the front of the body. So the head and the breast. The rest of it is fairly brown with streaking on the breast, okay? Remember, finches are seed eaters. You should know that. You should know this by now by looking at its beak without me saying that, right? It's got that thick, fat, seed-cracking beak. And the house finch, you do not need to know by song, but if you recall, finches in general have very complex sounds, like we talked about with the goldfinch, American goldfinch. I'm going to play it for you just so you can hear and get the hang of like what finches as a family sound like. Okay, so the last bird we're going to look at also has house in the name, and if you remember, when there's house in the name, usually that means they don't mind being around people very much. So we saw the house finch, which is a bird that often comes to bird feeders. Here is a house sparrow. Now, house sparrow is an interesting one, and I have a lot of admiration for this bird. A lot of people are very against this bird because it is not originally native to North America. It used to be named the European sparrow. It is now the house sparrow. And the reason I have a lot of respect for it is this bird manages to live in the middle of cities, or a lot of places which I refer to, I believe in something called the empty niche hypothesis. Those of you who have taken ecology before, you may remember that there's sort of a law of ecology that no two species can occupy the same niche. But we humans have transformed our landscapes so much that a lot of our native species can't live there anymore. You know, if you think about the middle of a city, our forest species are not going to thrive in those cities. And so, in a sense, there's an empty niche. There's a niche that no bird is filling. And so, I think that a lot. This is a good example. The house sparrow is a good example of a bird that fills this empty niche. This is the bird that you often see in a McDonald's parking lot eating McDonald's French fries. They have managed to adapt to eating human garbage in a lot of cases. These birds are very social, and they have that really intense hierarchy. If you remember in the um, David Attenborough, when he was talking about birds that have different amounts of black signifying their rank in the hierarchy, this was that bird. Okay, so this one has a sort of medium amount of black on its chin. So it's a sort of a middle ranked bird in the hierarchy. How do you know a house finch when you sorry, a house sparrow when you see it? They are fairly brown, and the brown is rather dark, rusty brown. It's not the bay brown of, say, the cedar waxwing. It doesn't have streaking on its chest, but the main thing for the males is this black face and black chin. Okay, the females are a little harder to identify, but still they're fairly solid gray with a little bit of rusty brown on them. Okay, but remember, I'm only going to ask you about the males. So if you see a bird that looks like a sparrow, it also has a fairly thick beak on these, so I can see how you might think it was a finch, but this is actually a sparrow, house sparrow, with the black on the chin, and the ones with a higher ranking will have black all the way down onto the top of their chest here, and then the brown is very dark brown, and you do not need to know this one by sound. Okay, that is the end of the birds for quiz 7.